I'd like to welcome everyone who's attending the Introduction to Community-Based Prescribed Burning in Ventura County webinar. If I could please just get an attendee to raise your hand or send us a question through the Q&A just to make sure that you can hear my voice. You have access to those functions. Thank you, Brent, Alice. I see you raised hands. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. I appreciate the chat Q&A. We'll get started in just a moment. I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to file in. I also want to make sure everyone understands this webinar is being recorded. Hi, Chris, did you? Oh, I'm sorry, OBLC. Tom, is that you? Did you have a question?
Oh, no, sorry. This is Brendan, Director of Field Programs. I was just raising my hand saying hello.
Oh, hi. Thanks for joining, Brendan.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple of minutes. We'll get started around 4:05. All right, well, we're at 4:05, so I'd like to go ahead and get the webinar started. And I'll start by saying hello to everyone and welcoming everyone to the webinar, which is an introduction to community-based prescribed burning in Ventura County. I'd like to thank you again for joining us. My name is Jamie Whiteford. I'm district scientist with the Ventura County Resource Conservation District, and I'm the moderator for today's event. And I want to acknowledge that support for today's webinar was provided by the University of California Cooperative Extension Agricultural and Natural Resources Division through CAL FIRE funding. The goal of tonight's webinar is to provide some context to community-based prescribed burning, with an emphasis on the role of prescribed burn associations. With that in mind, we have three general presentation topics that include, first, a discussion of burn plans, prescribed burns, and their applications. followed by an overview of community-based prescribed burn groups, including PBAs. And then finally, look at how community-based prescribed burns might be organized locally, such as in Ventura County. There will be different individuals leading each of these presentations, which are going to run around 40 minutes or so. And in the interest of time, I'll let each of the presenters introduce themselves when they start their talk. So as I'm implying, today's agenda is full of information. So we want to ensure the presentations move along in a timely fashion. There's about 21 of us in this grouping, at least in terms of attendees. So we know that there are going to be questions from attendees, and so all I want to do is take a moment to lay out some protocols with regards to questions, and I hope that we can adhere to that protocol tonight. There are three things that I want to discuss. First is, in the agenda, we do have a 30-minute question and answer period. Should be around 6:30 p.m. So if you have a general question, please hold that question until that 30-minute Q&A period, simply because your question might be answered by the information presented during the course of the webinar. When we get to that question and answer period, you may ask your question. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you, and you can ask it directly, or you can use the Q&A function to type in your question. I'll be moderating. I'll be looking at those question and answers as they come in, and others in the group will be as well. Secondly, following each presentation, we're going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to entertain short questions. During that time, you're more than welcome to run to the restroom, or if you have a question about the information that was presented in the preceding presentation, this would be a great time to ask your question immediately following the presentation. At the end of the presentation, if you do have a question, please, again, raise your hand so that we can identify that you have a question. We'll unmute you, and then you can ask it. If we have a ton of questions and we don't get to your question before we need to run to the next presentation, please put that question in Q&A. We'll follow up with that during that 30-minute session at the end of the presentations. And finally, because there is going to be some information that can be perhaps a little dense, and you're going to forget it if we wait too long. If you have an immediate question regarding the material you're viewing, and that question is brief, articulate, and specific, and it can't wait until the presenter finishes, then please raise your hand so you can be unmuted. So if there's something specific in that slide that it'd be difficult to refer to later, please feel free, raise your hand, and we'll try to address it then. So again, plenty of opportunities for you to ask questions. We welcome them, we encourage them. Just give some thought as to when would be the best time to ask that. And we will also have a potty break following the first presentation. And so you can take an opportunity to ask a question then, or if you need to use the restroom, you can run off and certainly do that. So with that, what I would like to do is I would like to step aside as the moderator for the moment and open the floor to Woody and Debbie. Woody Buska and Debbie Mayer will be leading the first set of presentations of the evening. So Woody, take it from there.
Very good. Thank you, Jamie. Welcome. My name is Woody Buska. I've got about 40 years in the fire service. I retired from CAL FIRE about 8 years ago. I provide wildfire and consulting services. I'm a state certified burn boss, and I'm here to talk about what prescribed fire is and a little bit about California's fire problem and how that might help. And then my colleague Debbie Mayer will follow up with more specifics about what is in a burn plan and what goes into that planning process. So I'll be sharing a PowerPoint presentation here. So we're looking at the applications of prescribed fire, and we'll talk about the fire and the fire environment here. So we know that California's landscapes are among the most naturally fire dependent on Earth. And these fire regimes were established by eons of geological, climatic, biological, and human influences, including both lightning and Native American cultural burning. In many California ecosystems, biodiversity, carbon stability, and overall ecological resilience are dependent on the regular occurrence of these fire events. We know that California is facing an unprecedented and growing forest and wildfire crisis. Decades of fire exclusion, coupled with increased impacts of climate change, have dramatically increased the size and intensity of wildfire. We are already experiencing hotter temperatures and more frequent droughts, and these conditions are predicted to increase in severity and length in the coming decades. So we must take action to prepare our communities and wildlands to be more resilient to these fire threats, or we risk losing the community values and natural systems. So science strongly points to the need to reestablish more frequent fire in our landscapes. And reestablishing these fire regimes will not only restore the ecosystem resilience, but will be critical to reducing the extreme costs of catastrophic wildfire, including direct loss of life and property, the costs associated with significant resource damage, a cost associated with increasing public health threat from wildfire smoke and the reduction of the wildfire smoke. The active use of fire is among the most important tools for improving the health of our landscapes and the safety of our communities. In California, we can no longer eliminate fire or smoke from the landscape, no matter how hard we've tried, how many resources we apply. Instead, our best option is to deliberately engage with fire in order to proactively decide when, where, and how it shapes our landscapes and our environment. And we can do this through the use of prescribed fire. So benefits of prescribed fire. And I think first to define what prescribed fire is. That's the intentional application of fire to land for these wildland management goals. And some of these goals include prevention of high intensity wildfires, watershed management, range improvement, vegetation management, forest management and forest health improvement, wildlife habitat improvement, restoring ecological integrity and resilience, community wildfire protection, carbon resilience, enhancement of culturally important resources, and maintenance of air quality. Also, these prescribed fires will help with firefighter preparedness and training. And in reality, even though we're lighting fire, we're putting smoke in the air that will reduce the smoke impacts from uncontrolled wildfire. There are many potential goals that can be achieved by using prescribed fire, and here's a few more specific examples. So reducing surface and ladder fuels that contribute to increased risk of uncharacteristically severe wildfire, crown fires, and extreme fire behavior. Reduce risk to local communities from wildfire and will help protect natural resources such as timber and other critical and important habitats and archaeological resources. Prescribed fire can also be used to promote native species and reduce encroachment of invasive species, for example, yellow star thistle. Will improve firefighter ability to safely and effectively respond to and suppress wildfire by creating more defensible space areas and also enhancing training opportunities and providing more firefighting experience for the firefighters. We can also reduce the extreme and fast-moving wildfires and threats to life and structures by reducing the fuel loads and breaking up the continuity of those wildland areas. We can improve air quality through reduced excessive smoke. So rather than having 2 weeks of inundation from a major wildfire, we may just have to endure a small amount of smoke for a day here and there. We'll be minimizing standing dead and hazardous fuels that have accumulated without other methods that can reduce those fuels. So prescribed fires can also help create and maintain a diverse mosaic of ecological communities, promoting diversity and different age classes, different stands, healths, different types of ecosystems in that mosaic. It'll recycle nutrients back into the soil and encourages water retention through reduced evaporation and use of water by invasive species, and increases the aesthetic value to the ecosystem by increasing the occurrence of following annuals, biannuals, while reducing understory buildup. Right, prescribed fires are conducted in compliance with the written prescribed fire plan that we've mentioned. That plan outlines the goals of the project and the conditions necessary to safely burn and in a controlled manner. And Debbie will be speaking to that shortly. Fire managers and prescribed fire specialists consider objectives such as those we've discussed, but for the actual burn themselves, the public and employee safety, we're considering the smoke impacts. We're looking into the weather, the topography of the burn area, the fuels, the size of the burn, and the precise environmental conditions under which it will burn. Also under the conditions which it will be suppressed if they exceed that prescription. And a prescription burning is a highly technical job, which requires knowledge of fire behavior, suppression techniques, and environmental effects of the fire. And that written prescribed burn plan must be followed during every prescribed burn. Planning for prescribed burns includes many of these components: the development of the burn plan, public outreach and education, smoke management considerations, the benefit to the community and the landscape. It may include environmental review and potential for pre and post burn research. We also need to consider scheduling resources and coordinating with landowners. All right, to summarize this section here, in California, we must act to prepare our forests and other wetlands to be more resilient to fire threats, or we risk losing these natural systems. One of the best tools at our disposal is the intentional managed use of controlled fire. Through prescribed fire, cultural burning, and fire managed for resource benefit, we can significantly improve the resilience of many of the California's fire-dependent ecosystems. So that's a quick introduction to prescribed burning and what the benefits are. I'd like to ask if there's any questions at this time before I turn it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Woody.
Well, very good. And unless there's any questions, turn it over to you, Debbie, to discuss a little bit more specifics about what goes into a burn plan.
All right, I'm going to first try to share screen. Can everyone see that, I hope?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this present, before I start, my name's Debbie Mayer. I retired from the U.S. Forest Service up in Northeastern California after 35 plus years, and I'm a qualified type 1 and type 2 burn boss. And so we'll go into burn plans. I spent about 20 years teaching this on the federal side. So this is about burn plans. For some people, it may be what you always wanted to know, but were afraid to ask. So what I did was, because there's 2 burn plan formats in the state. There's the California state that some of the agencies and the counties are using, and then there's the federal. And since the only burn plan I have seen from Ventura was multiple years old, I kind of used the federal one. And what I've done in here is everything in red is what's in the state. So there's a whole bunch of overlap. And with where you guys are at the beginning, I wasn't sure what you were doing. So we're going to go over both. And some of this we're going to go through pretty quick because, you know, a signature page for either agency is just who signed it. So you have the signature page, and then on the federal side, you have a go, no-go checklist, which in both the burn boss has one he has to complete, and then the agency administrator, who would be like the forest supervisor, the guy who's in charge at the National Park Service, the land manager who's in charge for the BLM. One of the things that the federal side has that the state side has not gotten into is a complexity analysis. So on the federal side, you have burns are rated as low, moderate, high, type 3, type 2, low, moderate, high. There's a whole analysis that people go through to come up with that rating. Complexity is pretty big on a burn. Complexity doesn't have to be driven by the burn itself. Your complexity that could be causing you to make your burn more complicated could be access. It could be houses that are nearby. It could be a landowner who's adjacent to the project who's not happy. It could be logistics, you know, getting equipment there, getting a helicopter there. All of that stuff, even is stuff that has to be done, but isn't necessarily part of the prescribed fire. And this complexity analysis starts to capture some of that stuff that could make your burn harder to implement. So the description of the prescribed fire area, this is in both plans. It's stuff like the location. Do we have a legal for it? Long will work. How big is our unit? 2 acres, 20 acres, 2,000 acres? What's the topography? It's flat at the beach. We're building a campfire. It's up at the top of Ojai, and it's all on 70% slopes. How many units are there? Do we have a treatment area that's 100 acres? We've broken into 2 or 3 units. Or are we trying to burn the whole 100 acres by itself? And then the description of the vegetation and the fuels. And that description includes both fuels inside and outside of the units and vegetation inside and outside of the units. The vegetation could be something as simple as it's oak woodland, it's grass, it's 10-foot high chamise. So objectives. In my opinion, this is kind of the start of why are we burning? What is our resource objective? These I cut out of an old burn plan. Establish a resilient forest. We're going to improve forest health by managing vegetation competition. We're trying to reduce the star thistle in this field from 100 plants per acre down to 10. Why are we putting fire back on that ground? So what's your objective also in here is what's your prescribed fire objective? This ties back into how do you meet your resource objective? One of our prescribed fire objectives, and I would assume it'd be the same down here too, is all burning will be in accordance with Shasta County air quality regulations. Because this burn came from an Eastside pine stand, we wanted to reduce the surface fuels from 4.5 tons per acre to 1.2 tons. We wanted to enhance community protection for Old Station because this project laid around the small town of Old Station. And we had trees, we could only kill 10% mortality by basal area. And for those who aren't familiar, basal area is just a way to measure trees. You know, one of your objectives could be you're burning in a chaparral field and you want to have 60% of it high intensity, but randomly scattered. And for those of you who are new to this, don't get overwhelmed. If you got someone helping you, once you start talking through the project and why you're doing it, this stuff comes very simple to put together. So a prescription, for those of you who are not familiar with it, there's another section in here called funding, but I left that one out due to the fact it's all about money, and that's pretty simple. A prescription is basically a box that you're creating that will meet your resource objective and your fire behavior objective. So the parts of the box to create this are temperature. Temperature is something we can measure very easily. Relative humidity, we can measure that. It can be done on site, both of those, with a bellwether kit. Wind speed, how fast do you want that wind? And notice on this prescription that is mid-flame wind speed. So that is the wind speed that's halfway, that's at mid-flame length. So if your flame lengths are 4 feet, that mid-flame is coming in at 2 feet. Wind direction. A lot of times wind direction doesn't drive fire behavior as much, but where wind direction can become a big issue is smoke management. You know, if your community is to the west of where you're burning, you may not want to burn with an east wind and put all the smoke in the community. 1 hour fuel moistures, fine fuel moistures, those can be calculated on site. Your 10-hour fuel moisture can also be measured with a 10-hour stick or using a remote automated weather station. On that prescription, we came up with flame lengths, which everyone can see, which is 3 feet or less for this project. Rate of spread, which is done in chains per hour, and the probability of ignition. The reason we use probability of ignition is how many, if we get something that torches out on the line and throws spots, what is the percentage of those spots that could actually land somewhere and ignite? Scheduling, this is not in the state one, but this is kind of critical for everybody. When can you burn? How long is it going to take? Are there any constraints? For some of our plant species, you know, if you're trying to burn grass, you may not be able to burn it in April because it's greened up. You know, when is your brush greening up? Do you have oaks in your project area that might be a little bit susceptible to crown scorch and you don't want to burn 1 month out of the year? Or the star thistle has already set seed and you want to try to catch it before it sets seed. There's all kinds of things out there that can affect and when is your best time to burn? How long is it going to take? Is it a day project? Is it 2 weeks? Those are kind of important things to know. Okay, this is pre-burn considerations and weather. This is in both types of the burns. On-site, so you have on-site and off-site considerations. This is stuff that, do you need fire line? Do you want to put hose around your unit? These are where your notifications to the public are, to dispatch. Do you need to put signs out on a road that say caution prescribed fire ahead? Caution control burn. Do you need to order that stuff? Do you need to get your drip torches out there? How about fuel? Where's your fuel coming from? If you're using a helicopter, say for some aerial ignition, what do they need? So that's where all this stuff is listed, and also weather. And I would say, especially with these PBAs, if you're getting weather, wherever you're getting it, make sure you can print it and keep a copy, because if something happens, that is your documentation. And you should have weather. You know, what's the weather going to do during the burn period, and what's the weather going to do a couple days after, so I can plan. Hey, we all been to briefings. That is when you pull, the federal side has a briefing checklist in it to make sure that you go over all the topics. It's not required on the state side. It's a good tool. Organization and equipment. This is also not in the state one, but it is on the federal. This is where you can list how many people. What are their qualifications? Do we need overhead? Do we need chainsaws, pumps, engines, supplies, tools, hoses, drip torches, fuel? How are you bringing enough fuel? I was on a burn once when the guys told me they only brought 50 gallons and we were burning 500 acres. We had to kind of fix that problem. Communication. This is also not required. How are you talking to each other? Especially with you guys who are trying to start this, are we using phones? Do we have radios, Morse code? This is a section that if you had radio frequencies, you would put them in there. You can also use TBA, like say Ventura County is going to assign frequencies the day of, that's legal. This is also a place I would put important phone numbers, whatever they are or whoever you need to contact, so that they can be found the day of the burn and people aren't scrambling through phones. Public and personal safety. This is where there's a safety plan and a medical plan. Your safety items can address things like, are you burning by a highway? Do we need to notify someone? Are there fences through your units? This is down here, there's a lot of poison oak. How are we going to handle that? What about bees? Do we have anyone allergic? Out here, snakes. What is required for PPE? The medical plan can be phone numbers. Do you have a list of medevac locations? If you do, include a lat long so that if there is an emergency, the stuff is readily findable. Test fire. This is also not required in the state one. Before you start a burn, you should have a test fire. This part discusses its location and desired fire behavior of the test fire. You know, is torching okay? Probably not. But what are we looking for? We want 2-foot flame lengths, 4-foot flame lengths. That's where this would be gone over. Ignition plan. This is in both of them. And this basically goes back to how are you going to light the unit? What is the pattern? What is the method? Are we using drip torches? Are we standing there using a very pistol? Do we have a helicopter flying over? Were you throwing matches in a grass field? How are we doing it? Holding. It's kind of important. It's not in the state one. What's the plan for holding? What equipment's needed? Is there a critical point where the fence crosses the line and you got to crawl through it to get to the brush pile on the other side? Those are things need to be identified. Mop up. Are we going to mop up? Personally, I don't like to mop up, but if you have a critical holding point, you might need to mop it up. Okay, and this one's a little bit tough for people to work with when you're starting on this, is contingency planning. This is an area you can address problem areas. There's a brush pile adjacent to the line. This is where it gets brought up in briefing. This is where we address it. This is where I also address spot fires, and all of our burn plans said spot fires will have fire line and 100% mop up will occur. The contingency plan is also where we address resources for that potential problem and response time. And as I used to teach at North Ops, one of the things I always said is look at that response time, because if you're having a problem and you need help, you really don't want your help 2 hours away because your problem's just getting bigger. Contingency resources should be based on the fuel model and fire behavior that's expected outside of the burn, because that's where you're going to be chasing your spots. It should be based on slope, access, expected fire behavior. And remember, contingency resources are not just because you have a spot fire. They can be used to assist for other reasons. They've been used to help mop up because all of a sudden we had a smoke impact and we need to get this out. Your resources, due to crawling through the brush all day, are tired and you just picked up a couple spots and you've used up a bunch of equipment, there's a whole bunch of other reasons to use contingency resources. And contingency resources does not mean you have a wildfire. It just means you need a little bit more help. So wildfire declaration. This is in both sets. Who is it declared by? The burn boss, the local battalion chief, the landowner. On the federal side, the agencies have policy and direction on declaring who declares a prescribed burn a wildfire. I don't know if Ventura County has a policy, but this is a conversation that needs to really happen, because when you declare a prescribed burn to a wildfire, there's a lot of stuff that happens and a lot of it's not positive. So you need to know, what's the plan? How are we going to do this if we have to? Who's in charge? And who's going to be in charge of that wildfire? So you've now gotten into that position that you've had to declare your escape a wildfire. So we have fire in our burn unit and fire on the outside of it. Remember, you still have to manage that prescribed fire. So you need someone to take on the prescribed fire, and then someone, or the burn boss, to stay with the prescribed fire, and then someone to take on that wildfire. And then who needs to be notified? With the federal agents, in the federal agency, it's our state and regional office, but who needs to know in Ventura County? This is a big thing because of money. Smoke management. This is in both plans. Most of them are permits to be obtained. Those vary all over the state as to how they do it. Each county is different. If you guys are on here and you're not from Ventura, ask your local county. Smoke sensitive areas. Compliance. What rules do you have to follow for your county? I added the smoke call number there, and I'll talk about that for a minute. So probably 20 years ago, one of the meteorologists in Redding got an idea that we should have a 1300 smoke call where all the burners could get on board and talk. And at that smoke call, North Ops talks about the weather, South Ops talks about the weather, ARB talks about the weather, the Air Resources Board, and then everybody can, you know, number one, it's a great place to hear what's going on with the weather. But the other good thing was everybody was on that call and was talking about how they could be burning and where they were burning and what they expected it to do. And you could ask questions. So that smoke call number is, I always put in our burn plans because it was very important. Smoke receptor should be identified. Is your unit going to smoke in the long-term care unit at the hospital? That might not be good. Is there the potential it could impact a school? That kind of stuff need to be identified. Mitigation measures. Can you burn with a certain wind direction? You know, can you try to keep the smoke out from people? And at some point, when we were burning down around Old Station because of where the community center, the project set, we basically said, you know what, guys, the residents down there, you're going to see smoke, you're going to smell smoke, and yes, there's going to be smoke here in the morning. We can only do so much. And that's okay. They were good with it because it was protecting the community. Post-burn activities. So now your burn's over. So now what? This is where you list the things you need to do post-burn. Does Ventura County have some forms they need to fill out? Are you doing any monitoring? Did you get some researchers out there to put some plots in, and you need to notify them they've been burned? This is where you also do things like water bar your hand lines, pick up trash, do any monitoring, pick up your equipment. This is where you identify all that, pay people, whatever needs to happen once that burn was done. And that is it for me.
Thank you, Debbie. That was a fast run through a burn plan.
Yes.
But I think that everyone in attendance can certainly see that there are a lot of elements that go into that burn plan, all of it related to communication and safety. I'm going to open up the floor to attendees for any questions. There is a question from Andy Johnson. I'll go ahead and read it. Andy, if you'd like to ask it directly, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. Short of that, I'll go ahead and read it for you. What level of fuel hazard modeling goes into contingency planning for fire escaping the plot?
So basically what they do is, or what I use the BEHAVE program, which is a fire behavior program. I assume the hottest day that we would burn based on the prescription, not based on some other randomness. Figure out how, say, my assumption was when I was burning, we had a spot, it was a half hour before we got it found. How big was that spot? And what did I need to catch it? So how many crews, how many engines, and how far away did I want them? Because the bigger your spot gets, the harder it's going to be to catch, and the more resources you're going to need. Now, being down here on some of these slopes and with some of these fuel models, it might be that once you do your contingency planning and start looking at what you're up against, you might want to just pre-position a dozer. I did that on a unit because we were burning and we were up against a 60% slope with no access. And I knew if we got a spot established, we were going to have some problems. So we pre-positioned a dozer out there. You don't have to put your contingency, you can take with you to the unit, which a lot of people do. Did I answer his question?
I'll leave that for Andy to determine. If there are any follow-up questions from Andy, again, please feel free. Oh, he says, great, thanks. All right, the floor is open to any attendees. Meanwhile, we'll all be scanning for questions. I want to ask you, Woody, you were discussing the PBAs earlier, and you had indicated quite clearly that there's a lot of technical requirements for burn plans and for prescribed burns. And I was just curious for the audience, what are sort of those requirements from a certification standpoint, and how would one go about getting those certifications if one wanted to pursue a career in fire safety, or if one was just interested in learning more about the actual elements of burning?
Right. So state fire training has a prescribed burn boss certification program that outlines the specific course requirements and experience levels that you would need in order to be certified as a burn boss. There's other avenues, though, for expertise in prescribed burning that don't necessarily mean you need to be a certified burn boss. So as Debbie was talking about all these components that are involved in a prescribed fire plan, there's a lot of science and ecological work that needs to occur there, possibly forestry specialists as well, environmental specialists that can help with the objective portion of why the burn needs to occur. So from a fire professionals or fire focused perspective, we specialize in getting the burn done. And other folks, we rely on other folks to come up with why the burn needs to happen, and then say, okay, we'd like to have this burn for these reasons. And then we can go ahead and write that burn plan for that project. So the coursework for conducting the burn would be to go through and become experienced in wildfire and igniting fire and working on controlled burns. There's a whole host of courses that are offered for that. And then, of course, science backgrounds through a traditional university or college program.
Thank you for that, Woody. I notice Georgia has been very active in chat. She's asked some compelling questions and her hand is raised at the moment. So Georgia, I'm going to invite you to speak. I'm assuming that that's what you'd like to do. And so hopefully you can unmute yourself. Hi, Georgia.
Hi, Jamie, and the presenters too. Thank you. I do appreciate the fact that somebody did answer me, but when I look at the reports and the scientific literature on chaparral, I don't see any scientists saying that it's ever appropriate. Yeah, I don't coastal sage scrub, but I kind of doubt that too. But I do know what their opinion is on chaparral, and it isn't just one, it's quite a collective. Could you comment on that?
Before I ask panelists to do so, I just want to back up one moment, if I may, Georgia. For those who may not have access to chat or didn't check it. So Georgia's question was relevant to chaparral. So Debbie, in her presentation, had mentioned burning in chaparral. Georgia's question was, scientists agree that burning chaparral is not indicated, but is damaging to the habitat. And she asked for a response from the panelists and attendants. So I'll open that question up for responses. Matthew, you stepped in to respond, so did Lenya. Feel free to sort of expand on those if you'd like. And if there's other responses, I'd like to hear those as well.
I could respond briefly to that, as in what I just previously said was, as prescribed burners, we get the mission to go burn for whatever purpose that mission is to burn. And that usually, those objectives are usually identified by someone else that would say whether or not that chaparral needed to be burned. Once we were told to burn chaparral, then we would go about the planning process to conduct that burn and plan to do so. But I don't think that as a prescribed burner, we're determining whether or not that needs to happen. That would be done by another scientist of some sort.
And that's a very good point. I want to be clear that when, as a prescribed burn association, the role is to help with those activities and make sure that there's trained, qualified staff to do so safely. But the role of the prescribed burn association isn't necessarily to identify areas that need to be burned. That should be the role of the landowners or the stakeholders engaging with the prescribed burn association. And then it's up to the prescribed burn association and the associated trained staff to do so safely. So that actual reasoning sort of lies in the hands of the community. And that's why there's such a huge emphasis on community engagement, outreach, and communication with the communities. Matthew and Lenya, if you've had additional comments, please feel free.
I don't in particular, Jamie and Woody. I think you answered nicely, and I submitted some written comments to the question as well. But I think, Jamie, the last points that you made, sort of hit the nail on the head for me.
Thank you. Lenya?
Oh, hi. Yeah, sorry, I'm Lanya. I'm with University of California Cooperative Extension. I'm actually based up in Northern California, so I don't want to speak specifically to the chaparral systems you have down there, but I do think it's important to remember that term chaparral is a very broad term that encompasses many different habitat types in California, and some of them they all have different relationships with fire. So I think we should be really careful about using those terms or talking about whether fire should or shouldn't be reintroduced to those and at what time of year. I mean, time of year is super important in any system, but especially in chaparral. So it's just, there's so much nuance and art to prescribe fire that we should just be really careful about talking about it in such general terms. In some parts of Southern California, there have been much more ignitions and much more frequent fire than the historical fire regime, and that's been damaging for some types of chaparral. In other areas, the lack of fire is a problem. So we have to weigh all of those things separately and really think about it at the site-specific, objective-based perspective. And that's the best way we can approach it, is to not generalize.
I appreciate.
Comment? I don't know. May I comment?
Oh, absolutely, Georgia.
Okay, thank you. Well, according to the experts that I've spoken with, as I understand it, chaparral isn't differentiated into sort of a subspecies kind of concept. It's burning in chaparral burns, to my knowledge, naturally from 30 to 150 plus years. And I have not actually seen scientists differentiate one type of chaparral from another type.
Well, yeah, we should follow up. I could connect you with some resources. There are definitely dozens of different types of chaparral in California. So different species compositions, different fire regimes, different, I mean, we have like 25 different species of manzanita in California. So we just really, we can't talk about it in that way. And honestly, the chaparral and fire relationship has been long debated in the fire science world, and it's not well agreed upon. So it's a really complicated box of information, and it's not just like one set of there isn't a really strong consensus within the fire science world. There are for certain habitat types, for certain age classes, for certain specific bioregions. But it's a pretty complicated set of conversations, even for those of us who are fire scientists. So I could connect you with folks in the California Fire Science Consortium, but I think there's just so much nuance, and it really does depend on the objectives of the landowner ultimately. So
yes,
feel free to email me or Matthew. I think we could connect you with a lot of resources within the university and the fire science community.
And this is exactly why for prescribed burn associations, such as the one that is being considered in Ventura County, we have to go out to the public and we have to engage with the communities, because they're going to help us define what those communities are in terms of the burn units and whether or not they're appropriate or not. So engagement and communication by all parties concerned is critical. There were some additional, and in Georgia, if you have any more comments, I'd be happy to host that. We have a couple of minutes before we move on to the next presentation. But it sounds like Lenya and Matthew are happy to engage and provide some additional material so that we can have a healthy conversation about prescribed fire and sensitive habitats.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. It's good to hear your voice, Georgia.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes before we move to the next presentation. We can go ahead and move forward and be happy to do so unless there's a need for us to take a break. If there's anyone that needs to take a break, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and introduce the next presentation. Okay. All right. So it looks like we can move to the next presentation. And so Lenya, that would be you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, how's that looking?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. I am sitting up in Chico, California right now, actually. So I'm joining you from Northern California. And my name is Lenya Quinn-Davidson, and I am a fire advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension. So I work kind of as a team with other fire advisors and livestock advisors and forest advisors around the state. And I'm lucky enough to work with Matthew and some of the other presenters on this call. And I'm here today to talk about community-based burning. So maybe it feels like an awkward transition given that Debbie and Woody did such a great job of talking about like the inner workings of the actual burn and the prescription and the burn plan and objectives. And, you know, they kind of got into the meat of that. I'm going to take us back out and talk a little bit about the bigger picture of what's going on in California right now. Why are all these different people interested in prescribed fire? What's happening with these community-based groups? Who gets to burn? How are they burning? How are they protected? What's the liability? Those are the kinds of things that I work on. In fact, I live in Humboldt County. I live in Arcata and work in Eureka, but I'm in Chico this week hosting the 3rd round of the California State Certified Burn Boss program. And Woody and Debbie were both in the previous 2 cohorts of this program, but I really work on state policy, on training, on trying to build capacity for this work, because we know we need more of it, but who's going to do it? And how do we make sure that they have the skills and the tools they need to do it well? So that's really my focus. So I just wanted to begin by saying that I grew up in Trinity County. So I'm from the very most remote and rural part of Northern California. And I have experienced wildfire impacts my entire life. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Trinity County, and it's the land of wildfire. It's about 80% federal lands, mostly Forest Service, that surround my hometown of Hayfork. And my whole life, it's just burned all around Hayfork. And my mom worked as a cook in fire camps, and fire's just been a huge part of my life. And as I got older, I really wanted to understand more how fire can benefit habitats, how fire is a natural process, and how we can restore it. Because really most of the landscapes that we know and love in California have some kind of fire relationship and some kind of fire story to tell. So our ponderosa pine forests, our coastal grasslands, our oak woodlands, and our chaparral. I mean, every place in California has some kind of relationship with fire. And it's up to us as land managers and as stewards to understand the history of fire and to understand what the future of fire could be. And I work a lot with tribes and cultural practitioners trying to understand their relationship and how they managed these places for, time immemorial. So how can we learn from them? How can we use what our collective interest and excitement and just kind of the dire reality that we're all going to, we're still here in California and fire's still here. Neither one of us is going away. So how can we move forward? So that's really my focus. And that's why I love prescribed fire. I love the idea of restoring fire as a process. And this, of course, has become a really big part of the conversation in California, not only at the community scale, but also at the state level. Immense amount of interest and momentum in fire-related policy, in trying to expand the use of beneficial fire. So earlier this year, Governor Newsom issued this strategic plan, which I recommend y'all go check out. And it really talks about how can we increase the use of beneficial fire in California, and it has some pretty bold statements. I think some of them are probably pretty unrealistic, but also just kind of, they speak to the interest and momentum that's going on in California right now. So in the lead pages of this strategic plan that was issued by the state and by Governor Newsom, it says that by 2025, we envision that California will have the policies, programs, capacity, and knowledge to effectively deploy sufficient prescribed fire cultural burning and fire managed for resource benefit across California. That's incredibly ambitious and probably unrealistic, but it really speaks to this idea that we know we need more fire, good fire on the ground. And we know we need to do the things that it takes to build the community capacity, the agency capacity, so that we can all work together and make this work happen. So people like me are working on this, and this has been something I've been working on for about 15 years. And the idea really is around empowering communities and landowners and tribal folks and ranchers and everyone to bring this tool back into our toolbox. We know it's not going to be the best tool all the time. It's not always the most appropriate tool, as Georgia brought up, but it needs to be in the toolbox. And so how can we give community members the skills and the resources that they need to do it well and to be protected in doing it, because we know it's a public benefit. So that's really the gist of my program and kind of my passion and what I work on. So a big part of this community-based movement that's going on in California right now has really been based on efforts in the Great Plains and other parts of the country. We in California are used to kind of being on the cutting edge of everything, or at least we think we're on the cutting edge of everything. But when it comes to prescribed fire, we're really far behind a lot of other places. So the southeastern US, the Great Plains, these are places that never lost their fire culture. They never had that disconnect that we've had in the West, where we took fire off of the landscape for decades and decades. They didn't have that. So we can go to them and actually learn about how this work could be done and what are some models for organizing ourselves and for managing liability and for tackling these really complex problems. So back in 2017, my colleagues and I actually went to Nebraska and spent some time burning with a couple of these community-based groups. And we brought back some of our lessons learned. We learned a lot. And what we saw were communities coming together to use fire for ecological benefit, for public benefit, and really kind of throwing the bureaucracy and the funding and all of those things that we are so hung up on, just throwing that aside and saying, you know what, this work needs to happen and we're going to do it. So we came back from that trip in 2017 and decided that we would form the Humboldt County Prescribed Burn Association, which at that time was the first PBA, Prescribed Burn Association, in California. And the very premise of it was that we could bring community members together with some skilled and trained folks, but some people who had never done any prescribed fire work, that we could bring all those folks together and that we could actually do this work and do it well. And we had there was a lot of doubt, a lot of questioning. Our CAL FIRE staff, I had a pretty close relationship with CAL FIRE that enabled that trust, that they said, okay, we're willing to see what this looks like, but it sounds pretty out there. And what we found is that we definitely could do it safely and that there was so much momentum and interest. Now for you all, that timing, 2017, that was when we started doing this work. Of course, that was the year that the Thomas Fire happened, as you all know too well, and also the wine country fires up in Northern California. So at that same time, there was this huge amount of political will and interest and social license and just demand, heartbreaking demand for something different around fire. And so there was just this crazy momentum around the state and people asking us, how are you doing this work? How can we do it too? How can we have something positive going on with fire? Because of course, everything was looking pretty dire. So the Humboldt County Prescribed Burn Association, we were able to raise a bunch of money to buy a bunch of shared equipment, which was then available to landowners and volunteer fire departments and groups that wanted to burn. So we have this wonderful burn trailer that has hand tools and water resources and a bunch of radios. We actually purchased our own radio frequency. And of course, a bunch of drip torches and Nomex and weed eaters and leaf blowers and just as much stuff as you can imagine. So we built this beautiful fire cache all in that first year. And that really enabled us to go help landowners do this kind of work. And in Humboldt County, we have a whole wide range of objectives that we're burning for, fuels reduction, oak woodland restoration, invasive species control, shrub encroachment, grassland restoration. There's so many different ways that we can use fire. And that's true where you are too, that there's so much nuance and opportunity. So we in Humboldt County at this point have done about 50 different community-based burns, and we've burned more than 2,500 acres since June of 2017 when we came back from Nebraska. Most of our burning is really focused on its ecological burning, but also fuels reduction, because of course fuels reduction is a beautiful benefit of any burning that you do. But we really have an emphasis in this area on range improvement and ecological restoration and habitat improvement. And this model has just spread like I would have never imagined. So if I had shown you this map of community-based prescribed fire groups in California 5 years ago, there might have been a little bit of blue. Blue are areas where people are actively burning, where these groups have formed and are actively burning. Yellow is where they're kind of talking about it. And then orange is where they're in formation. So you see you're there in orange, and maybe haven't really started burning a lot yet. But honestly, 5 years ago, this whole map would have been mostly gray. And we spent a couple years traveling around the state. We even came to Santa Barbara a couple times, but really trying to help people understand what this model looks like, the laws and regulations, just the fact that community members and landowners do have the right to get together and to learn and to use fire. That was all pretty groundbreaking. And here we are 5 years later, and there are 22 community-based prescribed fire groups around the state. So they're called different things. Most of them are essentially prescribed burn associations, but some of them have different kinds of names. Some are more formal, some are less formal, some cover a really small geography like an individual community. Some are county-wide, some are multi-county. But the real big picture here is that there's just so much demand. And I think communities are tired of waiting around for agencies to do all the work and to solve the problems. We know we need to do it all together, and that there's a lot of interest. There are rural communities where people need jobs. There's funding at the state level. There's so many things that are kind of coming together and enabling this work. And the state certified burn boss program, which I'll talk about too. So yeah, we have 22 community-based prescribed fire groups at this point, and it's just so exciting. I really couldn't have imagined when we formed the Humboldt County PBA that this would be what we would have just a few years later. So the whole idea behind prescribed burn associations, which you know because you guys are forming one down there, but it's really about neighbors helping neighbors, and everyone's welcome, and it's a community event. It's a way to build community, to bring often disparate kinds of people together. In Humboldt County, we have ranchers burning alongside environmental organizations and timber companies and university students and tribal members. And it's just this new kind of inspiring space. I mean, I think we're all used to being pretty divided and not spending time with people who are different than we are. But the prescribed burn associations are totally different because people have this shared vision of bringing fire back. So it's been pretty incredible to see that. For us up in Humboldt County, the volunteer fire departments have been a huge part of our model. We have a lot of small rural volunteer fire departments who love the training opportunity and bring their engines and bring tools. And it's been a huge opportunity for them, but then also a way to build our capacity. And at the end of the day, it's really about the idea that prescribed fire doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be overly bureaucratic. People have always had a relationship with fire, and the prescribed burn associations are enabling that again. We're rebuilding that fire culture in California. We're giving people the opportunity to have a positive relationship with fire. And that's pretty groundbreaking. I mean, I know it sounds cheesy, but it's really not. It's many people in California, as you well know, have experienced horrible things around fire. And so much of it is because we've taken fire off these landscapes. So this is a way to heal some of those wounds and then to prevent some of that future pain, really. So it's been really awesome. And I just wanted to highlight some of the different groups that are part of this. I call it a movement, but it's really a community of practice. There are lots of different groups, and the way it looks is unique to every community. It's not a one size fits all. It's really what makes sense for you in the place where you live, and how can you build some momentum around that. So one of the groups that I work with is the Cultural Fire Management Council on the Mid-Klamath up here in Northern California. And this group's really focused on bringing cultural fire back to their ancestral lands. It's folks with the Yurok tribe mainly who are leading it, but also in collaboration with the Karuk and the Hupa tribe. And they're really focused on basket weaving and restoring cultural fire to their ancestral landscape. So they're just doing incredible work. There's also in that same area, the Klamath Prescribed Fire Training Exchange. So there was a TREX near you just recently that Matthew and others organized. And this TREX model has been really important for providing training opportunities, like really formal training opportunities, and just kind of building comfort within communities around prescribed fire in a safe and really organized fashion. So the Mid-Klamath it's a really remote part of Humboldt and Siskiyou counties, but they have built this remarkable prescribed fire program that's very community-based and really focused on building the capacity of their community so that they can protect their towns. Their towns, kind of like my hometown, are embedded in the middle of these vast public landscapes. So they're surrounded by national forest that's, minimally managed really at this point. And they want to burn so that they can protect their communities from that larger landscape. And so they're a real model of success and a place that has a lot of really innovative and awesome people, and really rooted in kind of the cultural tradition and the tribal and traditional ecological knowledge of that place. Now in Butte County and Plumas County, which of course we know have suffered a lot from wildfire in recent years with the Dixie Fire and Paradise burning, these communities are on the cutting edge of the Prescribed Burn Association movement, and really because they feel that they have to do something. I mean, they have watched their Greenville and Paradise burn to the ground, the entire community. So there is so much momentum, and that's actually why we're hosting this Burn Boss class here in Chico this week, is because there are just so many community-based leaders that are standing up. They're retired fire professionals, they're community organizers, they're with the RCD, and they're saying we need to bring fire back, and we're going to do it no matter if CAL FIRE is going to do it or not. We're going to do it for ourselves, because we can't stand to live in this place if we're not restoring fire as a process. So that's been pretty amazing to see, and they're doing some really great work. And then in the Sonoma County area is the Good Fire Alliance. And this group formed in 2018. So after those wine country fires of 2017, and they're doing a lot around capacity building. They have a Fire Fellows program that's basically like an apprenticeship program to build expertise and knowledge in young people and kind of bring them up through the ranks so that they can lead and spread out around the state and do more of this good work. So really great work going on there in the North Bay area. And then, of course, the Range Improvement Association. So down in the Central Coast in Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo, these old range improvement associations are kind of rekindling and getting back together and reframing what it means to use fire and to be intergenerational with fire, and to kind of understand from some of the elders in the community of how they used to burn and maybe how they need to do it differently, or maybe mimic some of the things that they used to do. So I'm super excited to see some of that movement taking place down there as well. And I just like to show this. This is a little collage I put together. And I guess want to share with you all that this is really a community of people who are community organizers and leaders, and they're taking risks to do this work because they know it's the right thing to do. And now the way that the state policy is structured, and with these strategic plans and all these acreage targets, we're really asking these folks in this picture to do a lot, to train people, to affect policy change, to write grant proposals, to host workshops like the one we're in right now. There's a huge burden on the fire community right now to do the things that need to be done. And they're just some of the most passionate, committed folks I know. And that's why I love doing this work. But it's a big lift, and we need more people involved. We need you all involved. We need more state certified burn bosses. It's a wild field to work in right now. So what about liability? This is another big thing that I work on. I do a lot of policy work, and the whole realm of liability is just shifting and changing every year. There's some kind of monumental change, and it's because we have so much social license right now. There's so much will by our legislators to make a difference and to do the right things. And so we've really affected a lot of the right kinds of change in the last few years. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about that, and also just give a broad sense of what's the general liability landscape in California. So before we start, I do like to point out, because I think we tend to spiral out quite a bit, especially in California, on liability. You know, it's sometimes in some places it's a non-starter. People just can't, they're paralyzed by the thought of it. They're so worried. But the truth is that prescribed fire escapes are relatively rare, and damages from escapes are far more rare. And we actually, there's a huge body of research, of peer-reviewed, published literature, surveys, data collected over decades to show that most of the time, prescribed burns go as planned and fully successful. And I like to point folks to the work of a guy named John Weir, who's in Oklahoma, actually, but he's done a lot of great data collection nationwide and summarized a lot of the prescribed fire statistics so that we can understand what the actual risks are. And as you can see here in this 2020 paper, he compiled data from federal agencies, from prescribed burn associations, from contractors, and kind of compiled that all so we can understand the escape rate, which was around 1%. So about 1 in 100 burns might leave the planned area. And that's been well established by the Forest Service and basically across the board, that's kind of a standard, it's around a 1% escape rate. But the interesting thing here is that out of 23,000 prescribed burns that he compiled data on, there was only 1 insurance claim, 0 lawsuits, and 1 minor injury. So I think I just like to tell people this because I think it's important for us all to check our assumptions and to know that most of our concern around liability is really perceived and not real. It's not something that's well established. You know, we have no reason to think that that this should be the main thing we're focused on, and yet we are. So there is a good example also from California. So earlier this year, I was working on some prescribed fire insurance related policy work, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So I decided to do a survey of our California prescribed burn associations and ask them how many broadcast burn projects had they led since 2019, how many escapes had they had, and how many damages had been incurred by their project, from their projects. And I had responses from 13 of the groups, the 13 groups who were doing the most burning. So you remember there are 22 groups statewide. Some of those groups like Ventura, they're not quite burning yet. So I had responses from the 13 most active groups, and altogether they had implemented 356 broadcast burns in the last 3 years with no escapes and no damages. And I think this speaks to the nature of community-based prescribed fire because the stakes are so much higher for us, for us landowners and community members and cultural practitioners. We don't have the protections that our state and federal agency staff have when they're doing this work. So we do it with so much care. And this is what I've seen in my time working. I've worked on prescribed fire for 15 years and there's so much care. And so I think these data that I collected, I was just like, of course, like 356 projects with 0 escapes and 0 damages. That's way better than the 1% that's been documented nationwide. So pretty impressive to see the work that's going on around the state. So what do we mean when we talk about liability? This is something, we kind of throw that word out. And I think in general, most people are talking about burning down the neighbor's house or, causing some kind of property damage from prescribed fire. I think that's the general thing people are talking about when they talk about liability. But there are a couple different angles to liability that we need to think about when we're burning. That is one of them. It's very unusual, very rare. A more common, though still rare, situation is cost recovery for fire suppression. So if I'm a burn boss, if I'm Woody and I've been hired to lead a burn, I might implement that burn. Something weird might happen. I might do everything right, but there might be an unexpected wind event or something that causes my fire to leave the planned area, so to escape. And I might have to call CAL FIRE or the local fire department to come help me out. And I might get a bill from that. That's a very real concern that they might send a helicopter, they might send a dozer, they might send 2 crews out, and suddenly I'm on the hook for those expenses, for those costs, even though everything was going right. So that can be a real concern. That's called cost recovery, and something that we've worked on in the policy realm. So I'm going to talk about that. And then the last thing around liability is really just the idea of like someone becoming injured on a burn. So especially in this community-based work we do, we often have volunteers. We have to think about how we're going to manage that risk. And there are good ways to do that. In fact, I'm just going to say right now that all the prescribed burn associations that I work with and all the burns that I host, we have a release of liability. We worked with a lawyer. We have a volunteer form that everyone signs before they ever step foot in a burn unit. And it just acknowledges, yes, I know there's some risk, and I'm taking on my responsibility for myself when I'm on this burn. So that's the way to deal with that piece. But in this next part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about those other 2 pieces. So the civil liability for third-party damages, and then the cost recovery for fire suppression. So at the nationwide level, there are generally 4 categories of state liability law. This is determined at the state level, and on the kind of far end of least conducive to prescribed fire, there is a category called strict liability. And that means that you could do everything right, and you will be responsible no matter what happens. Strict liability, you are liable, no matter the care you took. It doesn't matter what happens. There are only a few states that have strict liability standards. And luckily, that's kind of a dying breed and really not a very common scenario. More common is the simple negligence standard. And this little map I have here actually needs to be updated. That's from a paper that was published quite a few years ago. The simple negligence standard is that you have to be shown to have been negligent in order to be held liable. And this could be for the damages or for the for the cost recovery, for suppression costs. So simple negligence, it's kind of actually a good middle of the road. It's like, hey, if you were being negligent, you should be held accountable. But if you weren't, then you have some protection by the state. On the far end of being like really conducive to prescribed fire and providing a lot of protection for the burner is the gross negligence standard. So that means that you would be liable if you could be shown to have been grossly negligent. So acting with reckless disregard, right, for safety, for other people. So that's the gross negligence standard. And then there are some states that have undefined liability. They just have no legal language about prescribed fire. So they tend to default to simple negligence, but that has to happen through like case law. Like something has to happen, and then they kind of, we see that they tend to default to simple negligence. So in California, for a long time, we were a simple negligence state for both third-party damages and for cost recovery for fire suppression costs. Until last year, we were able to pass a law, Senate Bill 332, that changed the liability standard, not for the third-party damages. That is still a simple negligence standard. So if you burn someone's house down, they would have to show that you were negligent in order to, have you cover those costs. But for fire suppression costs, last year with that bill, we were able to move that standard to a gross negligence standard. So we were actually able to make it more conducive. We were able to provide some protection and say, hey, if you were doing everything that you should have been doing, if you were taking care and you were within prescription and you were following your burn plan and something weird happened and you weren't being grossly negligent, that CAL FIRE will show up and provide some support and not send you a bill. And I'll tell you, as a burner, that's a big deal and really provides a lot of protection. And it's just the right thing, right? That we all pay taxes. We want to support this work. We want to know that if something goes wrong, people will feel comfortable picking up the phone and asking for help. We see sometimes, like before this change and in states that have more strict liability standards, that people won't feel comfortable making that call and they try to handle it themselves, and then things get even worse. So it's really good just to know I can make that call if I need to make that call. So that's where we are in California on those issues. Now, I was saying that I'm here in Chico hosting the California State Certified Burn Boss program. We have the third cohort this week here in Chico, a group of 21 people. This is a picture that we took a couple hours ago of this year's cohort, this group. I taught a class, or hosted a class back in April, and that was where Woody was. And then May of last year was the very first class, and Debbie was in that class. And so we're slowly building up this community of people who are certified to plan and implement prescribed burns, and to work with community-based groups to make sure that burn plans are written well, and that, you know, plans go successfully. And that it's just a really exciting program. This was mandated by legislation back in 2018, Senate Bill 1260 by Hannah Beth Jackson, who was from Santa Barbara area. And it's taken a long time to get off the ground. We had to go through a whole curriculum development process, and then, you know, get state approvals. And here we are finally hosting a class and really making sure that there's a standard, a state standard for what this should look like, and for what kinds of skills and expertise these people should have. So of course, people like Woody and Debbie have worked in fire for their whole careers and have a huge depth of knowledge. But we have younger people coming up through the ranks too, who really want to be part of this work, and they want to be part of the solution. So it's great to have a program like this where we can train and certify them and send them out into the world to work with folks and do great work. So what's the benefit of this program? I'll first say it's not entry level. It's really for folks who have experience with prescribed fire. And so it's pretty hard to get into the class because we have a lot of prerequisites and classroom requirements, but also field experience. You have to really have burned quite a bit to even get into the class. But one of the really important things it does is just recognize and validate that there are people outside of the fire management agencies who have expertise and who have something to add, and just saying, yes, we see you and we need you, and we're glad that you're willing to work in this space. So that was a really big deal for California. You know, for a long time, we've really only had fire management agencies involved in prescribed fire. So we're turning the corner of really trying to bring community members and cultural practitioners into that work. And in a lot of places, those are the folks who have more prescribed fire experience, are landowners and people who have lived in a certain place and used fire on their lands. So we can finally recognize those folks. State certified burn bosses do, through Senate Bill 1260, the bill that mandated this program, they actually have the opportunity to share liability with CAL FIRE through a cooperative agreement process. And this is all very new. So we have a couple places in the state where people are starting to develop those cooperative agreements, start working together, really collaborating with CAL FIRE, and we'll see how that goes. That's one of the big benefits, is this opportunity to share liability. As far as those fire suppression costs and that gross negligence standard, that bill required that a state certified burn boss review and approve burn plans in order to access that changed liability standard. So we need these people who have gone through this process and become certified to vet our burn plans. And so a group like the Ventura PBA would, it really behoove you to have Woody, because he's a state certified burn boss, review those burn plans, sign off on them, even if he's not going to be there when the project is implemented, for him to make sure that you all are hitting the right points in the burn plan, that your prescription looks good, just to have that kind of peer review, that technical review. That is what allows you to take advantage of that changed liability standard. So take advantage of Woody while he's down there. And then it also is going to give access to this new state-backed claims fund, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But this is basically a state-backed insurance fund for prescribed fire to cover any damages if they were to occur. We know it's super rare, but if and when that happens, we want to make sure that we have a way to cover those losses. So the state's doing some pretty innovative things there. And then if any of you work with NRCS, they just changed their state guidance, their whole program around EQIP and funding prescribed fire plans, funding prescribed fire implementation. They now recognize the state certified burn boss as a sufficient qualification for writing burn plans and for leading burns. This is a big deal, and it's really going to open up so much opportunity for PBAs and for landowners to do more of this work, just to have more people to help out who can actually be paid through NRCS to do that. So I recommend looking into that if you guys work with NRCS. So I mentioned the Senate Bill 332 that changed the liability standard around fire suppression costs, but I just wanted to stress again that it does require that that burn plan be reviewed and approved by a state certified burn boss. So again, take advantage of Woody. I believe there are plans to host this burn boss class again in the spring in like San Luis Obispo area. So you may have other folks who are ready to go to take the class and become certified. But it's really my vision for it in the work that all the work I've done around this burn boss program is to have burn bosses scattered around the state who can really support and elevate the work of these community-based groups. And in this claims fund, so what happened with that, this is the first time any state's ever done this. So it's pretty cool that we were able to do it in California. Last year in the state wildfire budget, we set aside $20 million to develop a prescribed fire claims fund. It's basically like a catastrophe fund. But then the money just sat there because there wasn't really any direction about how to operationalize this fund or what it should look like or who would run it. So this year, Senator Bill Dodd, who's from the North Bay area, he worked with a group of us practitioners who do this prescribed fire work, and we passed Senate Bill 926, which was a bill that kind of forced the operationalization of this fund. It said, okay, great, the money's there, now what? You guys need to do something with it, make it available so that people can take advantage of it. So there's a working group now that has been formed, led by CAL FIRE, but that includes me and a bunch of other practitioners and cultural burners, and we're designing the process. And so the coverage will be for individual projects. There will be a $2 million maximum per project, but it will be primary. So if the burn boss or the landowner has insurance, this would come first, and then your insurance would fill in behind if there were, losses in excess of $2 million. The projects, in order to access the fund, must be led by a state certified burn boss or by a federally qualified burn boss or by a cultural practitioner. So again, it's really important that we get these burn bosses certified and planted in all the communities to work, local people who know those landscapes and know the goals and objectives of the burning, so that we can take advantage of this claims fund. And there's still so many details to be worked out with this working group that we have. So what kinds of costs can be covered, how many projects can be covered at a given time. Obviously, $20 million is not that much money. And so how do we navigate, how do you sign up for the fund? How long do you have coverage for once you're enrolled? These are all the kinds of questions that are coming up for us. And it's like Pandora's box. I swear we have these calls where you're just like, oh my gosh, what about this? And we've got lawyers involved, and it's just a very interesting and complex conversation. And I feel really glad that I'm part of it, because I think it's so important to have that practitioner perspective when we make these kinds of important decisions. So in summary, I'm going to stop talking, I promise, but really, I think it's just important for us to know California needs so much more prescribed fire in the right places, in the right times. But our agencies can't do it alone. We really need all hands on deck, and community members and landowners and retired fire folks and, volunteer fire departments and tribes. Everyone wants to be part of the solution. And so that's where this community-based movement has really come from, is people are just saying, how can I please help? How can I be involved? And then we're changing the laws to support this work. So we are seeing such rapid development of the legal framework in California, and finally starting to mimic some of the things that we've been seeing in like the southeastern US, and just making that legal environment more comfortable, more protective for landowners, for communities, so that the good work can happen. And I just want you all to know that Ventura is really part of a larger community of burning. I mean, you saw 22 different groups, thousands of people, legislators behind you, CAL FIRE's behind you, your local Ventura County fires, but like we're all in this together, and it's just there's so much opportunity. So consider me a resource. I know I'm in the North State, but I'm here for y'all, and work really closely with Matthew and Woody and others, and I'm just really excited for all the momentum. So thanks for being here tonight and for listening to me talk for so long. And feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions about any of that. I'll just leave this up for a second so you can see my email address.
Thank you, Lanya. Appreciate all that information. The floor is open to attendees. Please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to vocalize your question, or if you'd like to pop a question into question and answer, feel free to do that as well. There actually are a couple of questions in Q&A that are directly relevant to the session that we just that was just presented. So I'll go ahead and address those. Those who asked the question, please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to add to that or respond to the response. So I'll start with a question that was posed from Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, and this was answered by Matthew in the chat. And I also encourage everyone, as you see little numbers appear in the Q&A icons down below your screen, you should be able to see the questions and also the responses. For those who can't do that for whatever purpose, I'll go ahead and read the question. From Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, if a private property owner allows the PBA to burn their property and there is an escape that causes damage, is the private property owner open to liability, or does that fall entirely on the PBA? You're muted, Lenya.
Yeah, sorry, I have like too many windows open. I'm trying to read these questions.
Right.
Yeah, so the landowner is always going to have some level of liability. I mean, if you have a formal agreement in place with the Prescribed Burn Association that, you know, says that the PBA is assuming all the liability, like you could put in place some kind of formal agreement to that effect. I don't know, you know, I mean, generally, I would say there are some different models for agreements from around the state. So all those different groups that I mentioned have different legal arrangements. The Good Fire Alliance in the North Bay area probably has the most formal legal agreement. They have a formal kind of MOU that states what the liability for each of the partners that's involved in the group is and how they would handle something in the event that something went wrong. I would say it's pretty unusual for a landowner to not assume any liability. And if you're having some kind of fire activity on your property, that you're a partner in that. So I haven't seen a scenario where the PBA would assume all of the liability. You know, in the Humboldt County PBA example, we actually assume the landowner is assuming most of the liability in conjunction with the burn boss. And we have a little agreement that they sign kind of in that vein. So it's really case by case and depends on what your vision is for that. But in my experience, if I or if the PBA is having to convince a landowner that the burning should happen, then I don't want to do it. You know, it really should be driven by the landowner wanting to be involved and caring about the work and seeing benefit in it. I don't ever want to force people to do something that they're not comfortable with or not willing to be partner in. So I don't know. Matthew, I see your hand. Is that maybe you have something to add there?
I actually had another question, but I do have something quickly to add, which is in some instances, we're discovering locally that for large private property landowners, specifically ranchers, that their ranch insurance actually provides a certain layer of liability coverage already. And so that's just a small detail to add that, you know, not changing any part of Lanya's answer, but in fact, there may actually be additional protections that a landowner already has baked into the insurance program they already benefit from.
Thank you for that clarification, Matthew. And since you have the floor, please go ahead and ask your question that you had. I also see that Ojai Valley Land Conservancy has a question as well. We'll get to you in just a moment. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
My question for Lenya was, if you had to make a best guess, when do you think that the prescribed fire claims fund will be operational? Will it be ready for burning this coming fall or not?
Oh gosh, Matthew. I don't know. I mean, if I had it my way, I would hope that this process would go quickly, and that maybe, in the next 6 months it would be operational. And so I'm really hopeful. We're having a meeting this Wednesday, another 2-hour meeting to discuss all these details. But in the end, it's CAL FIRE in charge, and it's highly bureaucratic and complicated. So I would hope that by, fall of next year that yes, I would be really bummed out if it weren't. I would hope sooner, but I don't know.
Thanks.
A lot of unknowns. All right, Brendan, I'm gonna open up the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you. And my follow-up question about the insurance for private property and stuff. Matthew somewhat answered it about the ranchers have their insurance cover it. But that, I was basically going to get at that. So the OVLC, we have a lot of property, foothills of Ojai. I think generally speaking, as an organization, we're supportive of the idea of prescribed burns on our land, but anticipating hesitation by our board, they would probably be like, "Oh, what if something gets out, and are we liable and stuff?" So I guess my follow-up question is there any outreach by your group, Lenya, to insurance companies in the state to get them to start to think about this type of coverage? From a land trust perspective, we have something called Terra Firma. It's an insurance company basically for land trust to protect against encroachment. It's all land trusts got together and basically formed it. So I'm wondering if there's any similar effort among prescribed burn associations to help encourage this.
Yeah, there absolutely is. And it's not just actually by prescribed burn associations, it's by our state insurance commissioner. So Ricardo Lara is our state insurance commissioner, and he actually wrote a letter that I was signatory to earlier this year, but that it was from him and me and one other person to the insurance industry, asking them to please re-engage with prescribed fire and to not confound it with wildfire. Because, the real issue is not that the insurance companies are uncomfortable with prescribed fire. It's more that they're just uncomfortable with fire in California and see it as a risk. And so in this letter, and I could share this with Matthew and he could share it out with you all, but Ricardo Lara is please, this work is so important. The state is investing so much. We're trying so hard to do more of this work, and we need you all to re-engage. And who knows? I mean, the insurance industry is not at the mercy of the state insurance commissioner necessarily. Of course, he just did that thing about, giving discounts to people who do fire mitigations on their homes, but he can't really mandate that they offer policies. So that's why this claims fund came into play, because it's kind of the only way that we actually could know and control. If we set aside money and we just provide that to practitioners, that's what the state could actually do. So we'll see what happens. I'm hearing rumors that some of the prescribed fire practitioners I work with are having more luck finding policies just this year in the last few months. So maybe there will be more opportunity, but in the meantime, I think that claims fund is such a wonderful stopgap to help us out.
Thank you for that, Lenya. We do have some additional questions in the Q&A, one of which is still open. So I'd like to read that one. This is from Leslie Purcell. She wrote, "I lived in Berkeley when we had the Oakland Berkeley Hills fire, which was caused by prescribed fire that was thought to be out, but smoldered and grew overnight." She just asked for a comment on that, perhaps related to the commonality or related to perhaps follow-up efforts to ensure that fire won't start. I see you had started responding, Woody, so I'll go ahead and cede the floor to you.
Right, thank you. I thought I was responded, must have had a snafu on my end, but that I believe was not a prescribed fire. the fire that caused the Oakland Hills fire was just a small fire that wasn't handled properly, wasn't mopped up. And then an ember from that fire the second day, after it was perceived to be out, blew into the brush during a hot, dry winds similar to our Santa Ana wind events, low humidities, and took off because the heavy fuels in that bowl there had not been managed properly, right? So there was heavy, decadent, old fuels that hadn't burned in a long time, hadn't had any fuels management, and that contributed to that fire and all the fuel within that community. A lot of things have changed as a result of that fire in the fire community, and just one of those components is that prescribed burning is a tool that could be used for fuels management to help prevent those types of catastrophic events. And then Leslie, if you do want to know more about that fire, you can get a hold of me at my email at surefiretraining@yahoo.com, because I was there for both of those fires, the day of the first one and the second fire.
Thank you, Woody. It's always great to have that firsthand account of those episodes. And then this was actually directed at me, and I'm not sure I have a good response, so I'm going to open this up to Matthew and Woody. This is from Larry Rose. He asked, where will burns take place in Ventura County this season?
Hey, Jamie, before that, I just want to say that I have to go. You guys, I'm sorry, I have another thing I have to go to. So I just want to thank you for your time, and feel free to email if you have more questions, or have Matthew get in touch with me. But apologies for having to leave early.
No worries. Thank you so much, Lenya. I appreciate your participation.
Very good. Thanks, Lenya. Right, so I can address that one as well. I thought I answered that, but the Ventura County Fire Department is hoping to conduct a burn in the hills between Ventura and Santa Paula. If everything goes well, that may happen in December. It may happen in January. It may not happen. As you can see, there's a lot that goes into prescribed fire planning, and a lot of it's based on the fuels and the weather. But we were going to be invited to that, to participate in that, and be a good educational opportunity for all. So just stand by for more information on that one.
And to clarify, Woody, you did in fact answer it. I just hadn't seen it.
No worries. Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to add, and I don't think this is what was meant by the question, but I'm kind of excited since it is the first live fire that the PBA will be responsible for. But actually this week on Friday, if all goes well, we do intend to have a pile burning workshop. So there will be smoke in the air, PBA sponsored smoke in the air, but it'll be a pile burn. But our toes wet, so to speak, or whatever the opposite of that metaphor is.
Thank you, Matthew. And also, I apologize for this. If you could please both pop your emails into the chat. I know that Leslie would like to reach out to you, Woody, and I'm sure there will be people who want to reach out to you, Matthew. And of course, you'd be a nice conduit for Lenya to communicate back and forth, especially with respect to George's earlier question. So if you could do that for me, please, I'd appreciate that. And for those attendees who are interested in following up, please make sure to take note of those emails that are in the chat or Q&A, and just copy those over to your email so that you can then reach out. All right, Matthew, we're right on schedule. It's 5:49. You're teed up at 5:45. So I think what we'll go ahead and do, unless there is an uproar from the attendees, go ahead and start your presentation and roll into the Q&A to follow.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. You can see my screen and hear me decently well.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So good evening. It's really nice to be here. I've spoken up a couple of times without really properly introducing myself. My name is Matthew Shapiro. I work with UC Cooperative Extension in Ventura County. I actually also cover Santa Barbara County, and I'm the Livestock and Range Advisor in the office here in Ventura, which you might ask is sort of a strange discipline to have and to be talking about fire. But I think, as will become more clear and more evident as I go through my talk, The reason as a livestock and range advisor that I get involved in prescribed fire is because the ranching communities here locally and for a long time have been involved in prescribed fire practices. And I'll be talking a little bit about that and more as I proceed through my talk. I want to apologize in advance. I've been sort of in the process of losing my voice all day. So I do hope over the next little while that it holds out, but bear with me if I take sips of water or lozenges here and there. So I'm going to try to talk about three things over the next half hour or so. The first is I'm going to talk about the history of prescribed fire in our region. We've kind of glancingly talked about it in a couple of different ways, and Lenya talked about the sort of California history broadly. I'm going to try to kind of ground us a little more locally. I'm then going to pivot to today to understand, or at least help you begin to understand what some of the pathways for actually executing burning are that are available to landowners in Ventura County. And then conclude by talking about sort of next steps, future directions, and in particular, how the Ventura County Prescribed to Burn Association sees itself functioning as we move forward. The history of prescribed fire really in our region really starts millennia ago. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm actually really not going to go into that, but I wanted to acknowledge the deep and long history of fire in our region by, at the very least, sort of directing the audience to two resources that I personally have found really fascinating and really helpful to kind of round out my vision of how fire has worked here historically and prehistorically, for that matter. John Keeley, who's a sort of acclaimed fire ecologist in Southern California, has a paper 20 years old this year talking about Native American impacts on fire regimes on the coast ranges here in California. And then a longer work by Richard Minich, who's a professor at UC Riverside, I believe. And in this particular book, actually really interestingly retranslates to more botanically appropriate, in more botanically appropriate ways, the Spanish journals of the first Spanish explorers who traversed through California. And I guess my point here, in addition to being sort of just interesting botanically, one of the things that's really impactful is just how much fire and indigenous fire they encountered when they first came onto when they first moved through the California landscape. But my story this evening really starts much more recently, in the mid 20th century. The reason I'm starting here is because it relates in a more direct way, at least, to the history of prescribed fire that I'll be talking about over the next couple of minutes. And that's really the story of community-led and private landowner-led prescribed fire. What you're looking at is a graph starting in 1945, going through about 1980, something that was that's presented in a work that Harold Biswell, in a book that he wrote, Prescribed Burning in California Wildlands Vegetation Management. The graph is actually from California Department of Forestry, now CAL FIRE. But what you're looking at is just the extent of permitted private burning that occurred during the middle part and sort of second, third part of the last century. So, you know, quite substantial, certainly not insignificant burning that was led largely by ranchers under permit from 1945 to 1977, it says there. Let me back up and say, the reason that ranchers in particular were burning were manifold, and I'll get to that on another slide. But in part, the history of burning in the 20th century is in response to wildfires. So many of us were impacted by the Thomas Fire in recent years, but of course, while we're sort of in the popular culture talking more and more about the pace and scale of and impacts of wildfire, it's not a new issue per se. What we're looking at here is an image from the 1964 Coyote Fire standing on Stearns Wharf in the city of Santa Barbara. But suffice it to say that there has been this sort of connection between wildfires threatening communities along the California coast and throughout California generally, And then a recognition that prescribed fire can be part of the solution to think about mitigating some of those negative impacts of wildfire. After that Coyote fire in 1964, a report was published by the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors entitled The Wildfire Threat. The Coyote fire impacted exclusively Santa Barbara County. And what they did was they spent significant amount of time in 1964 and 1965, 5 hearings, 18 hours of testimony, a number of witnesses. And what they produced a set of conclusions, and one of those conclusions was a real sort of coupling of this notion that controlled burning can be a tool for land management and should be encouraged, of course, under the strictest set of supervision and maximum safety precautions. And what's so interesting is that back in 1965, they brought light to the Santa Barbara County Range Improvement Association, which was mentioned by Lania in her presentation, but was at that point sort of the formalized set of private burning. My understanding is that Santa Barbara County, that Ventura County, in addition to Santa Barbara County, at one point had a Range Improvement Association. Only the Santa Barbara County Range Improvement Association is still exists, but this range improvement concept is similar to, and in most ways, analogous to the current prescribed burn association movement. In that report from 1965, the wildfire threat, the county board of supervisors brought sort of attention to the scale of burning, and Lania sort of got at this with some of the figures that John Weir produced out of Oklahoma. But this is sort of historical burning in the mid part of the 20th century here in our region. And I guess when I first came across this, I was really blown away by the scale and size of prescribed burning. In that sort of third or second column down at the bottom, you can see the total of acres burned under permit in 9 years, over 100,000 acres. Really just astonishing to consider what private landowners were able to accomplish across the landscape in such a relatively recent past. I have some images of what that burning looked like. In my mind, both these are sort of interesting historical artifacts, but also sort of images to aspire towards. I think as we think about sort of pivoting to expand and deepen our sort of private-led and community-based efforts here, I'm imagining burns that look a lot like these sort of vintage photos from 1970s. Here is in the early morning fog. You can see mostly ranchers gathering with their pickup trucks and a dozer there in the foreground. I like this image emphasizing just sort of how homespun these efforts need to be. I mean, there's fire engines that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars today, and yet an engine or a diesel torch like this that's sort of made from an old Jimmy Jeep is equally as effective to put fire on the ground. And in fact, up in Santa Barbara County, the ranchers who are still burning there still use a vehicle that I'm sorry to say still looks a whole heck of a lot like the one that you see here pictured. Another image from a controlled burn in the 1970s. And then this last image here, which is sort of a strange idiosyncratic shot, but I like very much, in part because I think it communicates a couple of things. One, that prescribed fire can be really profoundly safe. I'm always struck by how casual the sort of postures are of the ranchers and prescribed fire practitioners who are here, most not even necessarily paying attention to the flaming front. While that, of course, is not sort of a preferred way to conduct fires, and Woody is always so good to emphasize sort of the extent to which we need to have sort of safe and prudent considerations when burning. I like this image because I think it communicates and it really sort of disarms folks when they think about what prescribed fire needs to look like and can look like. So why was there this sort of blossoming of prescribed fire activity in the middle part of the 20th century? And I think just going back, one thing I really didn't say, the connection I really didn't make, is that prescribed fire and that acreage that was burned, while it sort of appeared to spike in the middle part of the 20th century, is really more a function, not so much of actual acres burned spiking, but just those things being documented. The ranchers who were burning in the middle part of the 20th century were continuing a long legacy, both of Euro-American ranchers who were burning, and then the indigenous tradition before them. They just started to sort of document and submit permits in the middle part of the 20th century. But you can see here in 1956, when this particular Range Improvement Association was formed, they articulated their objectives for burning in 5 bullet points, perhaps bullet points 2 and 3 being a little bit redundant. But, fundamentally, as is kind of communicated in bullet point 1 there, they were interested in what we might call range improvement, or improving the potential for these landscapes for grazing. More often than not, that meant temporary or permanent type conversion of shrub to grasslands. That happened to be their particular objective, and not necessarily the objective of all prescribed fire. But I'm also particularly interested in bullet point number 5, which is improving water yield, which is actually a sort of a consideration that John Keeley, in that earlier work that I showed a few slides ago, he talks a lot about sort of the extensive science that shows that at least temporarily reducing some shrub coverage in these landscapes really dramatically improves water yield from springs and from ephemeral streams in particular. And while it sort of jumps out of my chronological presentation, I did just want to, while I had the opportunity, to add what I think are sort of 2 additional considerations for why private landowners might want to burn today. And Woody, kind of already covered these, but in addition to the 5 that were articulated all the way back in the 1950s, I think there's a real opportunity for burning to both accomplish ecological restoration, and then some of the cultural burning benefits that both Woody and Lania spoke to. So this is another graph that doesn't exactly intersect with the previous graph of acreage that Harold Biswell had collected from CAL FIRE. But this shows a different acres, different burned acres. And so what you're looking at are statewide acres burned in CAL FIRE VMP program burning. And I need to clarify exactly how that's different. But essentially, the previous graph showed private burning. So that was community-based burning that was done privately outside of the agency context. What you're looking at in this graph is burning that was accomplished by the agency, in this case, CAL FIRE. VMP is an acronym for Vegetation Management Program, which is a program that CAL FIRE started, there you can see, in the early 1980s. And there's a long, deep, and sort of convoluted history as to why that program existed and how it interfaced with private burning. But put simply, there are many who sort of posit that it was the creation of the VMP program and sort of CAL FIRE taking over control of prescribed fire in the state that contributed to the diminished acres of community-based burning that spiked in the middle part of the 20th century. Another kind of notable thing to see in this graph is, while the program was certainly successful in the 80s and continued into the 90s, that by the aughts and the teens of this century, burning statewide had really diminished to an almost insignificant level, meaning that not only had community-based burning really sort of evaporated with the dismantling of range improvement associations and all of the complications that came with private burning in terms of just sort of a state climate that didn't allow for it, but also the agency burning that was supposed to sort of take its place had also diminished. And that's where things stood largely until I actually began my work and my position in September of 2017. And so just a few months after I started, and for folks who were in Ventura County in December of 2017, the Thomas Fire was really a seminal event in so many people's lives for so many different reasons. In the context of prescribed fire, I would argue it is also a seminal event in terms of the way that it was able to change the conversation locally and statewide. And Lenya really alluded to this in terms of the way that both the Wine Country fires and the Thomas Fire contributed to movement statewide. But here locally, I can speak from my own personal experience. It really reinvigorated two efforts in the two counties that I serve. One was, and Lenya put it this way, sort of revitalizing the still extant Range Improvement Association, but then also sort of initiating efforts in Ventura County to form in the model that Lenya had brought back from the Midwest, a similar but slightly different kind of organization, the Prescribed Burn Association here in Ventura County. This is an image from, I want to say, 2020 of a range improvement burn in Santa Barbara County. I took this, a nice visualization of all of the different agencies and efforts and people that are involved in putting together a range improvement burn these days. You can see ranchers, mostly here on the left, county fire here as a contingency resource, and then this gentleman here in the khaki is Glenn Gazdecki, the Air Pollution Control District smoke manager for Santa Barbara County. But this image really just to sort of communicate that after the Thomas Fire, we were able to draw on the tradition of community-based burning and really sort of jumpstart renewed efforts in Santa Barbara County. And then finally here, just an image, and Lenya talked a little bit about this concept of the treks, but this is just from a few weeks ago. I, along with many others, helped organize a treks event, which took place at two properties in Santa Barbara County. But the idea here, it's a different kind of community-based burning, not rancher-led. In this case, it was heavily sponsored by the Nature Conservancy, but had scientists from UCSB involved. Science actually conducted on the burn that you're looking at here to understand kind of grass, shrub, and oak dynamics in a blue oak savanna here at Sedgwick Reserve in Santa Barbara County. But this event brought together 45 prescribed fire practitioners from around the state to train and to learn and to burn with one another. So I'm going to pivot a little bit after kind of running through that history of prescribed fire in our region to talk a little bit more kind of nuts and bolty about how we might think about burning today. And some of the terms I've used already in describing the history, but I'll dive into them a little bit more. And I hope that this will prove useful to some of the folks on who are still with us to understand how they might be interested in burning, or just understanding the different options for permitting when it comes to having a controlled burn happen in our region. Fundamentally, there's sort of two options. There's the VMP program, Vegetation Management Program, which is still operated by CAL FIRE, and then in Ventura County's sake, it's the contract county, Ventura County Fire. And then separately, there's the private option. So built into California Public Resources Code, there's still the opportunity for private landowners to obtain relatively simple permits to do their own burning on their own land without public resources. What are some of the pros and cons of each? So I'll start with the VMP program. And these might be obvious, but I'll sort of run through them quickly. An advantage of the VMP program is that all of the liability is covered by, in our case, county fire. So to Brendan's question earlier, if you burn with county fire, the landowner holds no liability should there be an escape or some unforeseen impact to resources. Accordingly, also, because county fire would execute the burn for the landowner entirely, there's a very low cost to the landowner. And you have experienced county fire crews and resources out. And then also as a landowner, you don't have to concern yourself with the permits, the air quality permits, and some of the environmental review that comes along with the VMP program. But there are disadvantages as well. Probably the most significant is that there's really limited agency capacity. And Lenya talked a little bit about this. I mean, try as CAL FIRE might, there's just a really high demand to execute some of this burning. And at this point, given some of the administrative hurdles and the fact that County Fire and CAL FIRE haven't really been built up quite yet to execute the scale of burning that the state is talking about, there's really limited agency capacity. And it takes them a really long time to execute these burns. I can say in Santa Barbara County, if you were to approach County Fire up there, requesting a VMP burn, you're looking at potentially 2 to 4 years out to get any sort of activity executed on your property. And sort of relatedly, it's not guaranteed for that reason. There's a long queue, and a lot of things can happen in that time that might prevent you from having a successful burn. We'll talk a little bit now similarly about the advantages and disadvantages of the private option. And this sort of table is maybe too complex to go into with too much detail. But I guess what I wanted to emphasize is I wanted folks to think, yes, there's this sort of private option, this LE7 permit, but there's sort of 3 sub options within that. The first is for a landowner to do it absolutely by him or herself, calling over their neighbors and having some drip torches and lighting grass or shrub or woodlands on fire. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that. Probably most critically, unless you're a really highly qualified individual landowner who can draw on qualified resources, there's quite a bit of risk that comes to just doing it entirely by yourself. But the next 2 sort of sub options perhaps offer greater protections and greater expertise when executing a private burn. The second is conducting that burn with Ventura County Prescribed Burn Association. The idea here is that the PBA can help sort of coordinate a qualified burn boss, would own and would be able to lend to you, functioning and appropriate resources like that burn trailer that Lania was talking about. And then additionally, the PBA would be able to help walk you through some of the permitting and the smoke management permitting that's required, even in the private option burn. And then lastly, and it's sort of implicit in the second sub option, but this idea of you as a landowner actually separate from the PBA, but hiring a qualified burn boss. So that would be somebody like a Woody, who's either federally or state certified, who can come in and actually would charge you a per day fee to both write your burn plan and to burn boss your burn. And then there's even services around the state where you can hire wildland firefighting trucks and resources and crews for on a per day basis. But far and away, the disadvantage here is just the cost. You can get it done, but it costs quite a bit. I've talked about a number of these folks already, but I just kind of wanted to dwell a little bit on who is it that's actually involved when we talk about wanting to burn privately. Fundamentally, it requires a private landowner, and not only a private landowner, but we hope in many instances sort of community or neighbor-led burning. So friends, family, colleagues that would come and sort of lend resources to execute that private burn. Always we're going to need and rely on support from County Fire. Built into the code here in the county is an expectation and a desire to have contingency resources on site. So County Fire resources that are not conducting the burning, but are there should there be an escape or a slop over, County Fire on the ready to assist with any kind of escape. APCD, or the Air Pollution Control District, is going to be a critical partner. In all cases, there's a very diligent smoke management process, and there's a permit or a plan that needs to be submitted to APCD for any broadcast burn or pile burn to move forward. And then there's sort of other supporting agencies and government agencies. The Ventura County Cattlemen's Association has been supportive of the PBA. Land trusts have been supportive. The RCD is obviously the lead agency for our PBA. The Cooperative Extension, of which I'm a part, the Nature Conservancy is ramping up their prescribed burn efforts across the state, and I anticipate in the region as well. So finally, I'm going to sort of pivot to the future, talk a little bit more about how we see the PBA working. As I was putting together this presentation, I came across this screenshot from a Zoom meeting just a little over 2 years ago that I included just to kind of get both to communicate to this group just sort of how much time and effort and thought has been put into sort of the formation of the PBA already, and the sort of partners that we already have on board. In that particular Zoom call, we had Ventura County RCD, we had Kachuma RCD, Cooperative Extension, we had Woody and Jim Kniss, who were sort of private citizens who were formerly involved in the fire service, who were wanting to support this sort of community effort. But then also recognizing folks who weren't in that particular Zoom call, but have been already and will continue to be in the future. The Fire Safe Council, County Fire, of course, I've talked about that. CAL FIRE, the San Luis unit, which actually is the administrative unit for Ventura County Fire. Lenya talked a little bit about NRCS already and their capacity both to fund and support prescribed fire, neighboring PBAs and range improvement associations. And then, of course, you know, the strong desire is that this, I've said this a couple of times, but that this effort is really led by private landowners. To summarize our accomplishments to date, we've been meeting about this since before the pandemic. I can't remember if Woody mentioned this or not, but I think one of our greatest accomplishments thus far is that we have put together a meaningful set of training classes that align with sort of the federal expectations and classes to allow people to become qualified burn bosses. But we've identified individuals in the region and have supported them over the course of a couple of years and a number of courses to work towards that California Certified Burn Boss program, really at the, the guidance of Woody Busca as our training officer. We've been able to really kind of foster a core group of individuals who we hope will be qualified in the near future to be helping lead a lot of the burns that we want to do over the next couple of years. The California Deer Association actually awarded us a small grant that allowed us to get our begin to put our burn trailer together. So already we have equipment that we'll be able to leverage for future burns. We have just this month, just this week, we're rolling out a series of sort of public-facing courses, the one that we're in the middle of, but then also the pile burning workshop later this week that I already mentioned earlier in the presentation. And then we're beginning to identify and sort of make movement towards some identified sites for our initial broadcast burns, hoping to get a couple of those executed in 2023. And so what are some of our next steps? We're anticipating the opportunities to submit a large grant to CAL FIRE this coming year that will further help support our equipment cache. In addition, sort of the target for that grant, or the sort of the justification for that grant, is that we're aiming to achieve 200 acres of broadcast burning during the length of the grant, in addition to support for appropriate environmental review that comes along with publicly funded projects like getting funded through CAL FIRE. So working with a local consulting firm to be able to work through the environmental review compliance. Along sort of built in or baked into that CAL FIRE grant submission, we expect to continue meetings like this, public outreach, public facing workshops, both to allow the community to become more comfortable and familiar with the idea of prescribed fire in the region, smoke in the air, where appropriate, but then also to hopefully foster and train a fresh cohort of community members who might be interested at the very least in becoming and sort of getting basic qualifications for being able to be on the fire line and to assist the community in some of these burns. So that's I think a goal for the PBA absolutely in the coming years. I guess, and that's my last bullet point, talking about providing that training and support for the local prescribed fire community. So that's the end of my presentation. happy to take questions, maybe even open it up for questions broadly of all the presenters. I know Lenya had to step away. I did include that URL for anybody who hadn't already heard about the pile burning workshop who might be interested in participating. That's a way that you can register. There's still spots available to participate, and it'd be great to be able to include you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew. The floor is open. If anybody does want to raise their hand and ask a question, you can also type a question into Q&A. There was a question that was posed by Brandon at OVLC. Oh, looks like Brandon's raised his hand. Let's see real quick. There you go, Brandon.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw Woody's response. Thank you for that, Woody. So I'm thinking about this again from if we have prescribed fire on OVLC properties. That's why I asked the question earlier about the liability for the landowner, but I also asked the question about the public education because we are, even though we're a private entity, we are community supported. And if we got community blowback from even just smoke, that could impact our decision to move forward with future prescribed burning. So, you know, coincidentally, we're in the process with the county of reaching out, doing outreach to the public in the area about the land behind Matilaha Dam. And we realized nobody really even thinks about that land that's going to be opened up behind the dam. It's just not a regular topic of conversation that community members are having. My guess is most people who do not own large swaths of land in Ojai Valley do not know about the existence of the Prescribed Burn Association and would be taken aback by smoke just drifting into the valley. Is there like, so Woody, to your answer, that helps having a specific event focused outreach, but is there a more general ongoing education program? Like, is there a way to do kids in Nordhoff High School, like do freshmen in Nordhoff High School ever hear about Prescribed Burn Association if they live in downtown Ojai? And if not, is there a way to increase that outreach to help make this feel more safe to the community?
Yeah, I certainly think that that is one of the primary focuses for the PBAs are to provide that education and get the community more engaged in the need for prescribed burning and the understanding of those smoke impacts. Like I said, to tolerate the minimal amount of smoke and understand that that would be in exchange for having that 2 weeks of socked in heavy smoke, unscheduled, uncontrolled, right? And the health consequences that go with that. And you're right that each plan would target specifically the area that would be affected. There's a smoke management plan that also addresses the impacts of smoke. There's mitigation plans in the burn plan and contingency plans to, if the smoke becomes an issue, that we manipulate the burn or control it in a way to reduce or eliminate that impact. But certainly, I think all the organizations can get together to help provide that information to all levels of the community that you're talking about.
And if I could, Woody, oh, I'm sorry, Matthew.
No, you go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that I think it's important to also sort of take a step back and understand that the Prescribed Burn Association is a group that's looking to apply fire for good. And there is a messaging component that's required as part of that because it is a community-led and community-focused effort. But there's also other efforts that this group is also part of, and other agencies are part of. And specifically, I'm referring to the Wildfire Collaborative, which has a huge community outreach component with it. So there are multiple efforts geared towards communicating about not just the PBA, but also just wildfire mitigation projects and practices. that go along with prescribed burns. And I also just want to make note that we have had funding, as Matthew has indicated. And so we've been moving forward slowly to build up the capacity to actually do the burns. And meanwhile, we've also been targeting, communities that might be impacted through outreach and education efforts. But our funding has been limited to be able to roll out just consistent messages throughout the entire county. But that certainly is something that we're working towards. And as more funding is secured, we certainly will. And even maybe prior to funding security, we'll just have to do that in order to keep the momentum going for the Prescribed Burn Association and all the other associated efforts. So sorry, that was a very long-winded response. I cut in front of you, Matthew. Please go ahead and offer your comments as well.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. No, I think those were important things to say. I guess just in answer to the previous question, I wanted to say I absolutely, public outreach, public explanation, explanation to the public about prescribed fire and smoke in the air and the sort of trade-offs in terms of a little bit of smoke versus a lot of smoke later are appropriate and necessary. However, or in addition, and I'm speaking a little bit from the experiences of Santa Barbara County, which is maybe a couple of years ahead of Ventura County in this process, there's nothing more effective than putting smoke in the air and having the community realize that it's okay, right? I mean, the Santa Barbara County Fire and the Air Pollution Control District up there have been very vigilant in releasing press releases and sort of doing media communication in anticipation of a fire. But it's so powerful for those media releases to go out, for the community to smell a little bit of smoke, for the broadcast burn to be executed safely and effectively, and for the next day for there to be no smoke. I mean, I think it'll be, we'll just need to get there. I think, to a certain extent, one of the first things we need to do is to begin to get smoke in the air to sort of really drive home, I think, that message.
Thank you, Woody, Matthew. Brandon, your hand is still up. Just wanted to see if you had a follow-up.
Oh, no, sorry. Those were helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the questions. There are a couple of open questions. I'll go ahead and read those. Our friend Leslie Purcell had another question. Seems like invasive mustard grew back a lot after the Thomas fire. How do we keep that from happening with prescribed burning? Also, how do we get more natives versus invasives?
I can try to take that on, and unfortunately not necessarily a very satisfying way. I too noticed just a tremendous amount of mustard that grew back after the Thomas fire. And I don't know that there's a simple solution to necessarily preventing that in the case of prescribed fire. I think there are a couple of ways in which you can mitigate that. One of which is actually having a follow-up treatment of grazing. Cattle at low intensities across the the following year's grazing season is very effective at controlling mustard, or at least reducing its extent. In addition, we could be thinking about some strategic seeding of either improved sort of non-native rangeland species or California native species. But I think too, some of that depends on the kind of fire. While the Thomas fire was a very particular kind of wildfire that burned very hot at a very particular kind of year. And I think that we can manage some of the negative repercussions of fire, like mustard establishment post-fire, by managing the way that we burn, burning at different kinds of temperatures, at different kinds of years, at different times of year, excuse me. But it will absolutely be something we'll need to consider burning in the county.
Thank you for that, Matthew. And it kind of speaks to we've talked about or made mention of landscapes and the mosaic of landscapes and the different habitats and ecozones within them. But there's also a mosaic of management practices, one of which is prescribed fire. but certainly grazing management and other practices that might be in conjunction to really fully address that resource concern that prescribed burns can help address, but may not be the sole solution available or needed. There was a question that was answered by Woody. I'll go ahead and read that from Chris MS. And please, Chris, feel free to follow up if you have a follow-up question. The question from Chris was, when Ventura County opens up for prescribed burning, can landowners burn on their own? Or do they need to contact a fire agency or hire a private PBA crew burn boss? And Woody, you already spoke to this question online, but if you don't mind.
Right. Actually, I didn't catch that part. The county has already opened up for private landowners to burn and has been through the permitting process. So there's two types of burns that can occur. There's the broadcast burns and then pile burning. And there's a county existing permitting process to do that. The local fire department, which would be Ventura County, would issue those permits. And that's because they are the agent of CAL FIRE in Ventura County. Ventura County being a contract county, which means CAL FIRE contracts Ventura County to provide the CAL FIRE resources here and the authority to manage those prescribed burn permits. So that permit would be issued and it would have the details in that permit to tell you what you need to adhere to. Also need to notify air quality. If you're going to do a broadcast burn, you're going to have that smoke management plan in place. But if it's for pile burning, I believe that can be done just on burn days, but you still need to have a permit. And whether you have to have a burn boss or not depends on the complexity. The permit may require that you have qualified burn boss, or you may feel like you don't have the expertise to do that. Or perhaps, as you can see in the Range Improvement Association historical items that Matthew was talking about, those were conducted by landowners themselves. Does that cover the question?
Certainly did on my end, Woody. I think the one detail I might add, which wasn't really asked in the question and isn't really pertinent for Ventura County, but people might find interesting, is that there are two designations across the state. There's Zone A and Zone B as designated by CAL FIRE. I forget which one's which, but basically it means that in one zone, there are some months of the year that allows for open burning. And in the other zone, there are no months of the year that allow for open burning. What that means more specifically is that basically in the northern counties of California, during the winter, you can burn on your own private land as a private landowner without any CAL FIRE permit. That is not the case in Ventura County, I think for a number of obvious reasons, but that's generally true of most of the southern counties in the state. So for example, like where Laney is coming from, a lot of landowners just go out on a Saturday and will broadcast burn under their, in their oak woodland because, it's wintertime and the permitting structure allows for that. That is not true in Ventura County. So it is, I think, just if you're part of larger discussions about prescribed fire across the state, recognize that there is that pretty important distinction between those two zones.
Thank you for that. I somehow was trying to answer a question from Leslie. She said, will this presentation be available later? She had missed the opening remarks. And yes, this webinar is being recorded. And so we'll post that, make it available as soon as possible. So I apologize, Leslie, I meant to answer that by text and I messed it up somehow. With that, I don't see additional open questions. Please feel free, if you have any questions, to post those or raise your hand if you'd like to vocalize them. Meanwhile, Matthew, Woody, Debbie, I'd ask you if you have any closing remarks, if you'd like to state those.
I can just jump in and say that I'm really thrilled to have been part of the last couple of hours. I hope that folks who were on this call found it useful in one way or another. At various points, we had well over 30 participants, and it was just, you know, some names that I recognized, but a lot that I didn't, which I think for me is the most exciting part. I think, you know, as I sort of alluded to during my presentation, this is one of the ways in which we're kind of launching as a PBA, in addition to the sort of actually burning piece. You know, we expect many more of these sorts of discussions. I think our group would very much welcome feedback and input from anyone who sat through this in terms of things they'd like to hear more, points they'd like to hear fleshed out further. And I would really sort of encourage, if you're a private landowner or even just a private citizen who wants to learn to burn, you know, this is not a closed process, it's a community-based process. And I think that there are a lot of ways to insert your voice in these planning, in the planning process. So, you know, you're looking at the folks that you can reach out to. Some of our emails are in the chat there. If you want to get engaged, and I would encourage you to do just that.
Thank you, Matthew. I'd like to just make a few remarks as well. Apologize if I'm looking down because I'm trying to read my scrawls here in my notes. One of the things I wanted to reinforce is that this whole process is landowner and community driven. I just want to emphasize that everybody on this call, you have a voice. I'd ask you to please engage with others, your peers, to bring their voice to these workshops and to these webinars and to this topic. Another point I'd like to make, and this goes back to a point Matthew made earlier, there has been a tradition of prescribed fire, and we're working to sort of renew that conversation about it, and not only renew the conversation about it, but have a conversation with the landowners in the communities to understand the local need for it. So please, again, make sure to engage. Please make sure to use your voice. And also keep in mind that, you know, wildfires unfortunately do happen. Lenya made mention of that and the pain that it brings. So please keep in mind that doing fire under prescribed conditions to ensure the safety of those efforts is also helping the local fire agencies respond to local fires under local conditions so that they're better equipped to address those wildfires that may happen in our communities. And I think that it's also important to emphasize that outreach isn't just to those who are landowners or agency folks or even folks like us. It's also to the youth, because as I alluded to in an earlier point, you know, wildfire has been an activity that was very common in the past. So really by engaging with youth, sort of bringing back that familiarity as fire as a process. And those are going to be the same individuals who then have the experience to carry on prescribed fire in the very safe manner that we're all looking to achieve. So those are my comments. Woody, Debbie, if you have any closing comments, I think we'd all appreciate hearing that. If there are any follow-up questions, we'd love to see those. But I'll give it just a few moments, and then I think that we might be able to close the webinar.
I just wanted to thank everybody for their attendance and participation as well, for your questions. And please, if you have additional questions or concerns, follow up with us. And especially if you have outreach ideas and education ideas and how we may reach the communities to get that information out there, that would be appreciated as well. Thanks again.
Thank you, Woody.
I guess my only comment is, I don't know what happened to my camera, would be that if anyone has any more questions, concerns, or issues with burn plans or wants more information, you guys can get my contact through either Woody or Jamie, or somebody will have it.
Thank you, thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. All right, well, we still have 28 participants altogether, 24 attendees. So thank you so very, very much for sticking with us throughout the entire webinar. I hope, to reiterate what Matthew had said earlier, that you were able to get something useful and valuable from it. And I implore you, please, reach out to your peers, reach out to your agencies, reach out to everybody you know. Just let them know that we're making the effort to communicate, and we would love to see people at the next webinar. We'd love to hear your voices. And oh, we have a couple of open questions. Let me see. Oh, these are thank yous. All right, so looks like with that, we'll be able to close the webinar. Again, thank you so much for your attendance. It's greatly appreciated.